Try to picture this. A man scams an entire country, then gets rich again by selling the story of his own crimes. It sounds unbelievable, doesn't it? That man was Jordan Belfort, the Wolf of Wall Street. And the big question is this: how does a former criminal turn himself into a pop culture icon? But before the nickname, before the fame, Jordan Belfort was just a young man with a lot of ambition. To really understand how he built his empire, we have to go back in time. Not to Wall Street. Not yet. Much earlier than that. To a sunny beach. That summer, Jordan Belfort was in his early 20s. No finance degree. No connections. No real capital. The only thing he had was a strong desire to make money faster than everyone else. He and a friend set up a small stand on the beach. The product was simple: ice cream. No brand. No ads. Just one thing optimized above all else: selling as much as possible, as fast as possible. They shouted louder than the stand next door. They joked more. They made it hard for people walking by to say no. By the end of that summer, Jordan Belfort had made around $20,000. Not a huge amount, but for a man in his early 20s, it was proof of something dangerous. Money doesn't go to the smartest person. It goes to the person who sells the better story. That belief never left him. It only grew. But the important part wasn't the money. It was how Belfort started to see the world after that. He didn't think, "I'm good at selling ice cream." He thought, "I can make people act." A small difference, but a critical one. In the years that followed, Belfort tried many things. Small businesses, sales jobs, quick ventures. Most of them failed. There were moments when he was nearly broke, in debt, lost. But one thing never disappeared: his ability to recover quickly after failure. Not because he was optimistic, but because he never tied failure to his identity. Failure was just information, not a verdict. By the late 1980s, Belfort entered the world of stockbroking. Wall Street back then didn't look like it does today. No social media, no finance podcasts, no online get-rich courses, just desk phones, cold call lists, and daily pressure to make money. Belfort started at a traditional brokerage firm, and he learned one thing very fast: the market doesn't reward the person who understands the product. It rewards the person who gets others to buy. But before he could build anything, the market collapsed. Black Monday, 1987. In a single day, the Dow Jones fell more than 22%. Thousands of brokers lost their jobs. Firms shut down. Careers ended before they really began. Jordan Belfort failed again. If the story ended there, it would just be another failed career. But it didn't. After the crash, Belfort didn't go back to school. He didn't change direction. He didn't start over in the usual way. Instead, he looked at a different corner of the market. A darker one. A quieter one. Here, people didn't sell stocks of big companies. They sold penny stocks. Cheap shares, lightly regulated, almost unknown. Prices were just a few cents. Trading volume was low. Risk was extremely high. But there was one thing that stood out: commission. While Wall Street brokers earned a few percent, penny stock brokers earned as much as 50% per trade. Belfort saw something others ignored. Not an investment opportunity, but a chance to reshape the game. In this market, customers didn't understand the product. Regulators weren't watching closely, and the system moved slowly. Too slowly. Belfort didn't need to lie much. He just needed to speak fast, sound confident, and give people no time to think. The ice cream skills from years ago suddenly came back, this time inside a much bigger system. And here's the key point. At that moment, no one saw Belfort as a threat. He was just a small broker, selling things nobody cared about. In a corner of the market nobody watched. No giro, no viden, just a very small gear, inside a very large machine. And because of that, the machine let him run, completely unchecked. Jordan Belfort didn't create greed. He didn't invent fraud. He was simply the first to fully accept a simple truth. This system doesn't reward honesty. It rewards performance. From that moment on, the game began to change. But this was only the beginning. Jordan Belfort didn't want a job. He wanted a place where his skill could scale. So he built one. Stratton Oakmont didn't look like power. Not at first. It wasn't a tower in Manhattan. It wasn't old money. It wasn't respected. It was a small office. Cheap desks. Phones everywhere. But what it lacked in prestige, it made up for in one thing: hunger. Belfort didn't hire finance graduates. He didn't want people who asked questions. He hired bartenders, college dropouts, street hustlers, people who needed money. Now, experience didn't matter. Understanding didn't matter. Only one thing did. The product was simple. Penny stocks. Stocks nobody on Wall Street cared about. Companies with no history. Sometimes no real business. But the commissions were real. Up to 50% per sale. That changed everything. Stratton Oakmont wasn't built to analyze companies. It was built to move phones. Fast, loud, nonstop. And to make that happen, Belfort created a method. He called it straight line persuasion. The idea was simple. Never let the conversation wander. Never let the client slow down. Never let doubt settle. From hello to buy now, in one straight line. Questions weren't answered. They were redirected. Concerns weren't discussed. They were buried under confidence. The goal was not understanding. The goal was action, immediate action, and it worked. New recruits turned into closers in weeks. Not because they learned finance, but because they learned pressure. The office developed a rhythm. Phones ringing, voices shouting, deals closing, money moving. Stratton Oakmont didn't just sell stocks. It sold certainty to retirees, to working families, to people who had never felt seen by Wall Street. These were not sophisticated investors. They were ignored investors. And Stratton gave them attention. And the faster they grow, the louder they become. By the mid-1990s, Stratton Oakmont was no longer invisible. Regulators noticed. Complaints piled up. Inside the firm, pressure increased. Outside the firm, eyes were watching. The system was still running. But cracks had started to form. Collapse is no longer a question of if, only when. Stratton Oakmont didn't collapse overnight. It slowed down first. The calls were still happening. The money was still coming in. But something had changed. By 1994, complaints started stacking up. Investors who bought at $7 were watching their stocks fall to 30 cents. Phones rang for refunds. Lawyers got involved. Regulators noticed patterns. Not rumors. Patterns. Inside Stratton, questions began to appear. Quiet ones. Why were they selling companies with no revenue? Why were projections always perfect? Why did the same stocks always crash after Stratton sold? Management's answer was always the same: sell or leave. At the same time, the money was getting harder to hide. Millions were moved offshore. Accounts in Switzerland. Shell companies in the UK. Some funds were held under relatives' names. Others didn't officially exist at all. Cash was moved in pieces. $50,000 at a time. Slow enough to avoid attention. Fast enough to keep control. Jordan Belfort called it protection. The FBI called it laundering. Inside the firm, the culture shifted. Drugs were no longer a reward. They were fuel. People couldn't function without them. Speech slowed. Focus disappeared. Some brokers passed out mid-call. One had a seizure on the trading floor. Another was escorted out after a violent fight. And Belfort himself was unraveling. His marriage was falling apart. His addiction was public. He once crashed his Ferrari, while high, with his young daughter in the passenger seat. That wasn't a warning. It was a signal. Then came the yacht. In 1996, against advice, Belfort ordered his yacht to sail during a storm. Drunk, high, certain he was untouchable. The yacht sank. They were rescued. Millions in cash and drugs went down with it. Belfort survived, but the image didn't. Back in New York, the walls closed in. Forbes and the Wall Street Journal started asking questions. Former employees started talking. But the real danger came from someone else. Gregory Coleman, an FBI agent. He didn't chase headlines. He chased paper, cold call scripts, wire transfers, property records. He followed money that didn't match income, patterns that didn't add up. And slowly, the picture became clear. What Belfort didn't know was that the system he built was already turning against him. Some brokers were caught on unrelated charges. Others felt cheated. Unpaid bonuses, broken promises, loyalty cracked. And when it did, people flipped. They wore wires. They recorded calls. They handed over documents. Not because they felt guilty, because they were afraid. In October 1996, the FBI raided Stratton Oakmont. Early morning. Phones disconnected. Files seized. Computers copied. Someone tried to destroy evidence. Someone else tried to leave with documents. It didn't matter. The machine had stopped. But Belfort still made one final move. In 1997, while under direct orders not to move funds, he transferred $2 million to Switzerland. The transaction was recorded. The conversation was recorded. That was it. The system that once rewarded speed now punished visibility. By 1998, Belfort had no leverage left. The evidence was complete. The dominoes had fallen. And when there's nothing left to sell, a salesman sells the only thing he still owns. Information. He wore a wire. He named names. Over 30 employees were indicted. Some served longer sentences than he did. Stratton Oakmont was gone. The system that created it was not. This chapter didn't end with justice. It ended with transactions, deals, agreements, negotiated consequences, and the final outcome was already being calculated. By the time the case was over, the outcome felt uneven. Jordan Belfort faced charges that could have sent him to prison for 30 years. Guide fraude, securities fraud, money laundering. On paper, it was over. In reality, it wasn't. Belfort did what he had always done best. He sold. Not stocks. Not dreams. People. He cooperated. He wore a wire. He handed over names, recordings, documents. More than 30 former employees were indicted. Some went to real prison. Longer sentences. Less protection. Jordan Belfort didn't. He was sentenced to 22 months. Minimum security. No bars. No autumn guards. Tennis courts. Weight rooms. Time. That gap between damage and punishment wasn't a mistake. It was a negotiation. Inside prison, Belfort didn't disappear. He adapted. He talked. And one of the people listening was Tommy Chong, a comedian, serving time for selling drug paraphernalia online. Belfort told him everything. The drugs, the yachts, the money, the lies. Chong didn't judge. He saw something else. A product. Write it down, he said. So Belfort did. After his release, Belfort published The Wolf of Wall Street. It wasn't a confession. It was a performance. Fast, funny, extreme. There was no apology, just excess. And the public loved it. The book sold. Then the movie rights. Then the sequel. In 2013, Martin Scorsese and Leonardo DiCaprio turned Belfort's crimes into a global blockbuster. Critics praised it. The theaters were full. The system worked again, just in a different form. Belfort became famous for the very thing that destroyed lives. He went on talk shows, podcasts, stages around the world. He became a motivational speaker, a sales coach, an expert. The court ordered him to pay $110 million in restitution. Only a fraction was ever paid. The rest dissolved into trusts, assets, and legal distance. The victims didn't get books. They didn't get movies. They didn't get redemption arcs. A retired teacher lost her savings. A veteran lost his pension. Families lost homes. No camera followed them. And yet, Jordan Belfort's brand survived, thrived, because the system didn't reward accountability. It rewarded attention. Here's the twist. The problem was never that Belfort broke the rules. The problem was that he followed the incentives perfectly. The market rewarded aggressive selling. Hollywood rewarded spectacle. Media rewarded controversy. And the public rewarded confidence. So the machine kept running. It didn't erase him. It repackaged him. The wolf never disappeared. He just changed platforms. And the final question isn't about Jordan Belfort. It's about us. If a system can turn fraud into entertainment, punishment into branding, and damage into content, what makes us believe it won't do it again? Jordan Belfort's story feels finished. A rise, a fall, a sentence, a comeback, a clean arc. But that's only because we're used to stories ending that way. Systems don't. Stratton Oakmont collapsed. The phones went silent. The office emptied. But nothing replaced it with something better. It was replaced with something quieter. After Belfort, Wall Street didn't become more honest. It became more compliant, more regulated on paper, more complex in practice. The language changed. The incentives didn't. Cold calls turned into email funnels. Boiler rooms turned into call centers. Penny stocks turned into products most people still don't understand. Different tools. Same pressure. The core mechanism survived. Reward the person who moves money fast. Ignore the cost. Delay the consequences. Belfort didn't invent that system. He proved how well it worked. Think about what actually happened. Hundreds of millions disappeared. Thousands of lives were damaged. And the system responded by asking, how entertaining is the story? Hollywood didn't ask if the damage was repaired. Publishers didn't ask if the victims were paid back. Media didn't ask if the incentives had changed. They asked one thing. Will people watch? And they did. This is where the story usually gets simplified. People say, greed did this. Bad people did this. Rules weren't strict enough. That explanation feels comfortable because it puts the danger somewhere else. But the uncomfortable truth is simpler. The system didn't fail. It worked. It rewarded persuasion over truth, speed over reflection, confidence over accuracy. And when it collapsed, it rewarded the best storyteller again. Jordan Belfort didn't escape the system. He followed it to its next phase. Today, his face isn't behind a desk phone. It's on stages, on podcasts, in seminars, selling something new, but still selling. And this isn't unique to him. We see it everywhere. In finance, in tech, in media, people who break things loudly often land softly because visibility has value. The victims don't disappear. They're just not useful to the system anymore. They don't scale. They don't entertain. They don't convert. So the story moves on. New names, new products, same structure. And this is the part that matters. Not whether Jordan Belfort was punished enough. Not whether he feels remorse. But whether the system that created him was ever held accountable. It wasn't. It can't be, because systems don't go to prison. They adapt. And if a system once turned fraud into profit, collapse into content, and punishment into a brand, what makes us believe it has stopped doing that now?